To the man at the amusement park, to preface this, I was a 16-year-old female. I'm quite petite and generally not intimidating. I went to an amusement park with my two friends who we'll call John and Lucas. John is a 6 feet 6 inches dude. Lucas is 6 feet 1 inch and built like a fucking tank. He actually ended up making it into the Marine Corps. Needless to say, my 5 feet 1 inch 110 pounds ass was well protected. We'd had a fun day at the park. It was getting dark, and most of the kids had gone home. We were on our way out when John and Lucas needed to use the restroom. The restrooms were those shitty little shacks, and the one the guys chose was in a desolate corner. I didn't need to go, so I waited outside. John and Lucas hadn't been gone for more than 30 seconds when a stench hit me. I heard footsteps and turned to see a tall, bulky man in a tattered hoodie. The smell was like a mix of severe body odor and urine. I figured he was homeless. I have huge passion for working with the homeless population. So I smiled at him and tried to ignore the odor. "Hey girlie." I was turned off by that, but decided not to let that deter me. I was pretty naive at the time. "Hi. Do you need anything?" His eyes lit up, but not in a good way. He looked like a kid who'd just gotten a mischievous idea. "My car broke down. I live out of it, and I don't have the money to pay for anything. Could you come and help me?" A few red flags came up with that. 1. Why wouldn't he ask one of the many security guards or employees right by the general parking lot? 2. And most importantly, what the fuck was he doing in a parking lot that cost $20 and an amusement park that cost $45? I thought about offering him some money, but I was already pretty short on cash as it was. "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" It was John and Lucas. Lucas, who'd always been a bit temperamental and overprotective, stormed towards this guy. John backed him up, rising to full height. The guy immediately let go and backed up. "Hey guys. She was just offering to help me with my car." John and Lucas looked at me. All I could do was shake my head. Lucas grabbed the guy by the hoodie and pulled him close. "You lay a finger on her, or anyone else, I'll find you and fucking get you." I noticed that Lucas had pulled out one of his pocket knives. The dude seemed to notice too, so he turned and ran, metaphorical tail between his legs. Lucas and John comforted me, reported it to security, got me back to the car, and took me home. I told my mom about the situation and asked if they could stay over. She said yes. I didn't sleep much, but thanks to Lucas and John, I did sleep. I never found out if the guy showed his face again or got caught. Even so, creepy smelly perv. Let's not meet. Amusement parks aren't always fun. This has happened fairly recent, about a year ago. Background: I work at an amusement park. As decided to visit with a cousin of mine. One day I was off since it was free. As my cousin and I were walking to ride one of the most popular ride, a guy pointed at me and then looked at his friend saying, "Hey, he likes you." I have never seen these two guys before, so I think nothing of it and continue to go forward with the ride. Thinking nothing would happen, I was exiting and they were still sitting there. I didn't notice them again till probably 20 minutes later, since I was talking to a coworker which I liked. As I sat down at a table with my cousin, they sit at the table across from us. When I realize this, I tell my cousin we have to go. I was talking to my coworker again as I see they have stopped by a trash can to clearly see me. I tell him what is going on and that I have to leave. If they follow, he was to stop them. I took the opportunity to walk away as soon as I can when they aren't looking. We head to another ride to try to lose them. It was unsuccessful. They followed us out of the ride. I'm scared out of my mind now. I started running as fast as I can to get away and find the closest ride possible. I turned my head and saw them chasing after me. Lucky for me, they made a wrong turn. After we lost them, I sat down in private place until closing time. I figured I hadn't seen them for a half an hour. I could peacefully leave. I was wrong. They were waiting at the front entrance. We, somehow, snuck by to tell a security officer what happened for the past 2 hours. We were walked safely back to my car and I have not seen them since. I quit right after. I was 16 at that time and my first job was at a local amusement park. At that time, I weighed about 120 pounds and somewhat tall, around 5 feet 7 inches. It was a pretty boring and lonely job. My boss never let me talk to the other workers in the other shops. That's why she moved me to one of the retail shops, all the way across the park, which is pretty dangerous because I have no one else around me. I was standing outside the entrance to my shop to get some fresh air. I saw a guy walking by with a really nice camera. I asked him a few questions about it, since I was trying to save up to buy a GoPro for my trip to the Dominican Republic that summer. We striked up a conversation about the camera and then it started to rain. He came into my shop and looked around, while I was just hanging out at my register. This man was about 50 or 60 years old and pretty nice, but this is when things get a little weird. He asked me what I wanted to do when I get older. At that time I wanted to be a special effects makeup artist. So that's what I told him. He said that he has a friend that needs someone to do makeup for him for this movie. Then he asked if I was interested and I had to come up with some excuse as to why I didn't want to do it or give him my personal email address, which he asked for. I told him that my mom wouldn't allow me to do that, especially with a man that I didn't know. I bet you're all wondering why I didn't call security or anything like that. Well, I can't call security unless I feel threatened. Which I didn't. This guy was very calm and collected, but downright creepy. When I stopped talking to him for a bit, to text my manager, at the time, he walked over to my register and just stayed there, trapping me in that corner. I quickly texted my manager, "Help, there is this guy in my shop and he won't leave." I tried to do that quickly, so he wouldn't see me. After standing at my register for a few minutes, in silence, he walked back over to the wall to look at stuff and pretend to be busy when other customers walked in. That's when he asked to take a picture of me. I got so weirded out. I said, "Sure." And he snapped the photo. I gave this really weird look in it, because I was truly weirded out. A few minutes after, my manager walked in to tell me that we were going to close. I was so happy, but that's not the end of it. It was 9 at night. And the man wouldn't leave, even when my manager was in there. He stayed in there for 2 more hours and it wasn't until 11 when my manager kinda told him to leave. He walked out and she turns to me, "Was that your dad?" I said, "Hell no, I don't even know who that guy was." She was shocked and absolutely creeped out, as was I. I shut the garage door to the shop and stayed inside to count money, and as soon as we were about to leave, we looked outside the window to see if the guy was there. And he was. He was just waiting in his car for me to leave. We had to call some of the other managers down to where I was in the pouring rain, to escort me to the building on the other side of the park. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if I walked back to the building by myself. Maybe he would have abducted or tried to hurt me, but I really don't want to know. I'm just so thankful my manager and everyone else who helped me through that nightmare, but I will always thank them with my life. Amusement park. When I was 7 years old and I lost sight of my mom in an amusement park. Then this old man started to walk towards me. I didn't think much of it until he got close. He said, "Hey, want to go on a ride? Do not talk." I stepped away. He took a step closer. He followed me. Then, I started running. He ran too. I was so scared. My mom told me about what old men can do to me and what to do to protect myself. Then me having short legs, he caught me. I started shouting, "Rape!" over and over. People watched us. He said I was being an insolent child and started dragging me. Then, my dad came up from behind him and hit him with his camera and said, "Get your hands off of my daughter." Police was called and I was happy to be saved. My mom was so proud of me that I used her techniques. Amusement park creep, Southwest. This takes place about 6 months ago at my job. Some background. I'm 19 years old, 18 at the time. I work at a small amusement park/arcade in a semi-rural area, which generally will have a good amount of people. This happened during our summer season, so we were open until 9 p.m., but we generally only have at most 10 families around 6:30-7. I mostly work outside as a ride attendant, so I get a lot of customer interaction from people all the time and don't usually think much of it. Onto the story. I had come into work at around 3 p.m., and my day was going normally. At around 3:30 I was running one of the roller coasters, which has a big box for the operator to run the ride from. These 2 kids show up, one looked about 8 years old and the other about 15 or so. They seemed very sweet and very funny, so I was just enthusiastically telling them the rules and just being as kind as I possibly could so they could enjoy themselves. As soon as the ride would finish, they'd run from the exit right back into line to go again. Which isn't unusual because I get kids that do that all the time. Sometimes I'll even have kids who will do it over and over again for an hour or more. Soon enough, they stopped riding and waved me off as they ran to some other rides to have fun. At some point afterwards, one of my coworkers came up to switch positions with me and sent me off to the Tilt-A-Whirl, another ride we have. As I'm walking down, I see from a distance a man in a black shirt standing at our gem mining station. It's just a smallish water tower that constantly releases water so kids can sift through sand and get cool rocks and such. He was just holding his hand in the water, so I was going to ignore him as I made my way to the ride. As I'm getting closer, he looks me up and down and asks for my name. I couldn't lie about it obviously since I had a name tag on, so I just told him. He then proceeds to say, "Do you think I can see you later tonight?" To which I respond no. I walked away to the ride I was operating and told a coworker about what happened. We laughed it off as if it were nothing, and I sent him on his way to the ride he had to run. Not even 5 minutes later, the guy shows up to my ride with the 2 kids who I let on the roller coaster I was previously running. I'm of course not looking forward to letting him on, but I toughed it out since the kids were just trying to enjoy themselves. They walk up to the entrance of the ride, and I asked the man if he could hold the fence door open as I scanned his wristband. The fence door opens inward and the scanner is on the opposite side, so I asked customers to hold it open so I don't block them as they try to get on the ride. He responded with, "Of course. I'll do anything for you. Whatever you want." As I scanned their wristbands, the scanner showed that they had run out of credits, so I made sure to tell them. The younger kid with him looked upset, so I told them they could get on the ride this one time and they could just go talk to the front counter after. I put them on and explained the rules of the ride, and ran it as usual. The entire time that the ride was running, I noticed the man was staring at me. He never let his eyes off of me, so I tried my hardest to avoid his gaze. I tried not to seem alarmed. Because his kids were in other carts joking around and making funny faces and gestures at me trying to make me laugh, so I just pretended I didn't notice the man. Once the ride finished, the youngest kid stood up and said he wanted to go again. I felt bad for him, and since there wasn't any people in line I told him he could go on again. The older kid felt dizzy, so he just got off the ride while the man and younger child stayed on. I ran it again, and noticed the man was still not letting his gaze off of me. Toward the end of the ride, I saw he was lifting up his lap bar, so I told him to leave it down. It acts as a second brake to slow down individual carts. Later, once the ride came to a stop, I looked over at him to tell him about the front counter, only to notice that he had put his hand in his pants to make his crotch more noticeable. I was highly disturbed, of course, because I was literally not trying to be forced to look at some dude's excited phase. I quickly made sure they left and just avoided looking at the man the entire time. Later, once I had no more customers, I made sure to go to my supervisor at the time. I explained to her what happened, but she didn't know what the guy looked like, just what his older son looked like. As I was telling her, she saw the older son in the parking lot leaving, so we assumed they were gone for good at that point and we sort of went back to normal working. I was still on edge because I was super uncomfortable. But I just talked to my coworkers to pass the time. At around 6 or so, my supervisor asked me to take cardboard down to the dumpster. I went down alone, so there weren't many people nearby. The dumpster is sorta close to some rides, so you could see what was going on from other points at the park. As I'm throwing away cardboard, I notice a figure walking down toward the dumpsters and see that it's the same guy from earlier. He had come back to the park again. I start to freak out, because I didn't have a walkie-talkie on me. And there wasn't anyone nearby to do anything. He kept walking closer and closer, eyeballing me every so often as I internally start panicking and getting increasingly nervous. I thought in that moment that I was going to be kidnapped and I didn't even know what to do. Thankfully, my supervisor saw him from a distance and started speed walking in my direction. She walked right past him before he could get to me, and he did a double take and just stood there as if he wasn't walking toward me. She walked me back up, and told me that she didn't know if that was the guy but didn't want to leave me there alone. She switched me to another ride and said she'd make sure he didn't follow me around. She had told some other coworkers about what happened, and a coworker from before made sure to stay near me because the guy kept lingering at some areas looking at me and trying to be near me when he thought my guard was down. Every time my coworkers thought he was getting too close, they'd stand near me to make sure he left me alone. At some point, his youngest kid came to the ride I was operating and he stayed on until closing time came about, so the guy was nearby for a lot of the time. Toward closing, I was offered me a ride home from a coworker because he didn't want me to be alone walking to the parking lot. As we go outside, we sit on the stairs with some other coworkers, and we notice this car that was still in the parking lot, even though at that point we had been closed for about 45 minutes. The guy was still there, with his family and everything just lingering. There were no other cars in the customer parking except for them, so I assume this dude had to have some of his own family involved because he was just waiting there. I can't see any other reason he'd be there. It felt too coincidental that his family so happened to stay later than they had to. I kept nervously looking over and looking to see what he was doing, and he was just staring in our direction as he just sat while his family was doing some other stuff. Thankfully at some point they had left, but I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable at the thought of if I was just completely alone when I left. I'm so glad I have some responsible and caring coworkers.